Couple of seconds to get started. And once again, hello everyone. Thanks for joining us today for today's Security Academy live series, Securing the Utilities and Engineering Sector. Today we have an exceptional lineup of instructors who have a wealth of expertise in security and protective measures for the critical infrastructure. We are excited to welcome John Sphere, CEO of Alert Enterprise, Mark Weatherford, CSO of Alert Enterprises, and Brian Harrell, Vice President and Chief Security Officer at AdvanGrid. The former Assistant Director of Infrastructure Security with DHS and CISA, to share their expertise in the future-proofing critical infrastructure. Before I turn things over to our speakers, I'd like to take a few minutes to mention a few housekeeping notes. Each course in this series will be recorded and made available to you through your MyC account within 24 to 48 hours. And you can use your email that was used to register for this course to access the recording. We are still working to get the first few sessions uploaded, but please give us a little bit more time and make that available as soon as we can. As a reminder, if you have any questions throughout this series, throughout the presentation, feel free to enter them into the chat and we'll make those feel free to enter those into the chat and we'll answer those as soon as we can at the end. We have about 15 minutes of questions already lined up, so we'll make sure we get those questions answered. And with that, I'll take it away.
Thank you very much. Wow, what a title, Future-Proofing Critical Infrastructure. How do you future-proof, technology that's 40, 50 years old? Well, we're going to dig into some of that today. And, Jasper Guild, CEO of Alert Enterprise, Brian Harrell, CSO at AdvanGrid. This is an amazing panel we have lined up here. So I'm going to jump right in. I think over the past year, Brian, your former agency, CISA, Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency, has put out two excellent guides on cyber physical security convergence, including a sector spotlight for the electricity subsector. So what's your impression of the U.S. government's increased focus on cyber physical security for critical infrastructure protection? And what's your impression of it, and how do you think they're going to be able to implement this?
Well, thanks, Mark and Jess, for having me. I think first and foremost, I think there is a strong recognition that convergence is here to stay. Right, we've been talking about it for 15 years. Now we're actually starting to make major muscle movements, organizational shifts to actually focus on convergence. And so even when I was at CISA and we started kind of building these major documents, what we didn't want the documents to do is simply sit on the shelf and collect dust, right? They needed to be operational in nature. And so I think within CISA, within DHS at large, and then other components within the federal government, is this recognition that the threat landscape has changed. Rarely do we see a cyber-only attack or a physical-only attack. That threat landscape is very blended today. And so to operate in these old silos from way back in the 80s and 90s, if you were to do that today, I think you're missing the mark. I think you're not seeing 100% visibility. I think your situation awareness is lacking. And so we need to bring the different disciplines of security, IT, OT, physical, and you might even include emergency management into that fourth silo, because again, as we're responding to, as we're mitigating, as we're reducing risk, all of the silos, I think, need to be addressed and discussed in a very formal way. The way we have done that here within AdvanGrid, and I stole this from DHS, and I didn't make it up or anything like that, but every single morning we have what's called the DUB, or the Daily Update Brief. And every single morning at 900 hours, we have IT, OT, physical, insider threat, NERC-CIP governance or compliance, intelligence, all on the same line for sometimes it's 5 minutes, sometimes it's 25 minutes. But we talk about what just happened in the last 24 hours and what do we anticipate in the next 24 hours. And so it's bringing complete situation awareness across the entire organization to really focus on the threats that are coming at us about 1 million miles an hour. I think in federal space, I think there's recognition that with everything being as interconnected as it is today, where your cameras are IP based, where your access control systems are internet facing. Nobody wants those to be the enemy avenues of approach to get into your system. So we must link physical and cyber together.
So Jasper, you started Alert Enterprise way back in 2007, 2008. And at the time, I can remember meeting with you in 2009, and you were talking about this integration of physical and cyber. And I just remember thinking at the time, wow, this is really important. So, same question to you. The government has now, CISA put out the cyber physical convergence document that literally you could have put Alert Enterprise's title on it and it could have been our product. It was so good. So what's your impression of this new focus by the government?
I love it. Just like you mentioned, that this is what we have been dreaming about for so many years. I'm so glad it finally happened. And I think Brian said it very well. So one is obviously very timely. And like he was mentioning, how difficult it is otherwise to have all that convergence manually, and how technology can make such a big difference. Like he was mentioning that every morning you have to look across all of these areas to figure out, how were the threats in last 24 hours, what could happen next 24 hours, how technology can empower them across, cyber, physical, IT, OT, different areas, how technology can bridge the silos to give the complete picture, how technology can mitigate potential threats, and how it can make sure that proactively identify potential threats. So this is, I think, perfect opportunity. It's a dream come true opportunity. So that a white paper was, I think, the perfect thing and a very timely. Finally, it happened. I'm so glad it finally happened. Thank you.
Mark, I can also add to that. I think the only way, and I think Jasper just mentioned it nicely, I think the only way convergence really works, though, is if government, private industry, organizations at large embrace technology and embrace automation. It is that automated piece that is absolutely critical. Otherwise, everything is manual, it's laborious, it's time consuming. And so the way convergence is, the only way it's going to be successful is if we were to lean on the automation. It has to.
I agree. So Brian, you mentioned you have this daily stand-up, which I absolutely love because I believe in them. But man, it sounds like you bring in everybody, that has even a sliver of responsibility for security and incident response. So are you aware of other organizations that are doing that? Because I'm not.
I'm not. And, frankly, again, I stole it from my time at DHS. The government is very focused on, these stand-up meetings in the morning, right? Just again, to bring awareness to every stakeholder, right? And so when I first got to my organization now, what I wanted to do was remove this phrase that we've all heard before. And that phrase is, well, I didn't know that was happening. I didn't know that was going on. And so I wanted to ensure that everyone had complete visibility, whether it's a copper theft, whether it's a nation state adversary pinging against our firewall, whether it's, hey, we're about ready to go into merger and acquisition. We really need to be focused on, interested parties from these particular countries, knocking on our door. I wanted to make sure that everyone was on the same page. And then, oh, by the way, we have a significant insider threat concern within, pretty much all utilities today. And so we need to make sure that we're all in alignment. I think it reduces redundancy. It adds a little bit of efficiency. And I think it also creates lines in the sand so that we're able to smartly move forward with a little bit more efficiency. I don't think it's the only model, but it certainly works for us. And again, it doesn't cost us a dime. It's pretty darn easy. And sometimes it's 5 minutes and sometimes it's 25 minutes.
Yeah, beautiful. So Jasper, so there's some best practices recommended in this CISA guides on cyber physical security convergence. One of them is eliminating silos. And I know that that is a big deal to you. I hear you say it all the time. So, what are some of your takeaways from this and that the audience should focus on?
Sure. I think one of the biggest one is that living in silos, like all the organization, typically any utility or other sectors we go to, you meet with the different organizations. They, even if they are talking to each other, like Brian mentioned, so typically, let's say they have collaboration meetings and all, but still technology-wise, they tend to operate in silos. For example, when somebody in HR, let's say the organization lets somebody go, their badge is not disabled automatically. Imagine somebody could be a disgruntled person was let go, and imagine their badge is still active. Obviously that could be very high risk, especially in case of a disgruntled person. And likewise, contractors, you won't believe, contractors is one of the biggest risks for organizations. Contractors get hired in different departments. When, let's say, contractors leave, people typically forget to disable their badges because that's a manual process. And many times
it's also a SIP compliance violation.
SIP compliance violation. So especially for utilities, which is our like most critical sector, the last thing you want to do is take these kind of high risks. And then also, I think, be able to identify a potential threat that could be a cyber attack. So we have customers where, the real incidents happen where somebody, you see a change in a relay configuration, but nobody was physically present in a substation. How could that happen? That for sure is a cyber attack. But you will only find these things if you are proactively bridging the silos, if you are leveraging technology to do that. And then another thing that we have heard from customers is where somebody is going to a sensitive facility at odd hours. Let's say a contractor going to a substation at 11 p.m. in the night. So our customers, when you talk to them, the CIOs and others, they say, no, nobody goes to substation for fun. You go there to fix a problem. Why would we go to substation at 11 p.m. in the night when there is no work order? Why would we be there? So all these challenges can only be addressed if you leverage technology, because technology can help you bridge the silos. Technology can give you the visibility across all of these different areas. Technology can actually automate these processes so that you don't have to actually find the issues after the fact. So it's a very good opportunity, and especially now with the CISA white paper, this gives a reason for utilities. It's sort of a template to bridge the silos. So,
well, you've both talked about automation, and I think that should be the key word. We all need to get a tattoo that says automate. But I'm going to come back to that. So this one's for you, Jesper, too. In a recent survey, 54% of respondents said that their physical security teams don't frequently interact with their cybersecurity counterparts, i.e. silos. But 70% of them believe that their company would be better equipped to avoid a crisis if both the cyber and physical security teams could proactively monitor potential threats in a single unified platform. And this underscores the importance of deeper integration, as we've been talking about. So instead of admiring the problem, let's talk about solutions. So Jesper, how can physical security and cybersecurity teams start to dismantle these silos and begin to unify their security missions?
That's a great question. So I think one is to learn from the utilities who have already done that. The number of utilities who have been very forward-looking, where they have automated the process. In many cases, they have actually, it became a business enabler. Typically, people think about security as a cost center, sort of a necessary evil. You have to do it. You don't have a choice. But imagine you are able to not only bridge the silos, but you're able to save tons of money. Like in case of one customer, they have savings are tens of millions of dollars because they were doing everything manually. So now everything's automated, right from somebody's hired in the organization, giving them the access, activating their access and all. That could be the physical access. If the person's role changes, automatically giving them the appropriate access, taking away the past access, proactively complying with all the regulations. like you mentioned, NUCSIP, and somebody leaves the organization, disabling the access. So that's one, but also like Brian was mentioning, the overall, analytics across IT, physical, OT, where you can, see a potential threat and all. So I think there's so many examples of customers who have done that. So if I am, let's say that I could be head of physical security, I could be the CISO for a utility, I would leverage those as role models to learn from them, the organization who have done that, and replicate similar success. And it's not difficult to do. There are a number of organizations who have done that. So rather than one of the examples, one of my most favorite examples, one of the customers who did that, so they were able to see they reduced the cost to like 1/3 of their previous cost. So the CSO said, imagine my CFO found out that I was spending 3 times more money and I was living with 3 times more risk. That was a recipe for getting fired. I'm so glad I addressed it before, my CFO found out. So I think that's great stories for everybody to learn from. The only thing is to be really bold to give the, try it. Wayne Gretzky, my favorite ice hockey player, who says, you miss all the shots that you don't take. So it's an opportunity to take shots, especially in the most critical sector. I mean, there's nothing more critical than the power. If power goes down, everything goes down. So we need, people to be more, I think, bold, and obviously our responsibility is to help, so that we really help them if we can, any way we can do that.
Yep. So Brian, we worked together at NERC many years ago, and I know we talked about this because you were leading our physical security efforts at the time. What's been holding up convergence all these years? I mean, why? I mean, I can remember talking about security convergence like 12, 15 years ago.
Well, my answer on this, and I guess it's attempt to be provocative. So here we go. I think the answer is, kind of these legacy organizational charts, and sometimes you see cybersecurity underneath the CIO. And let's just be completely frank. Right now, cybersecurity is getting a lot of money. It's super sexy. The budget strings are wide open, and so the CIO shop doesn't necessarily want to relinquish that. And then way over here, you have the legacy, Gates, Guns, Guards, former cop kind of leading your physical security component. That's often under, your chief administrative officer or, under human resources kind of thing. And so there's these silos that are also built based off of budget and dollars, and people not wanting to let some of them go because they're still kind of building their kingdoms, so to speak. And so I think, yeah. I think the answer is just legacy of, well, we've always done it this way. And, well, the other utility that we tie in right down the road, well, they're still operating the old way too. So we're going to continue to operate in this silo, which for all the reasons that we've just mentioned is inefficient and provides a significant amount of blind spots. That's what keeps me up at night, is not knowing what I don't know. And things are happening in the organization that I just don't have any kind of visibility of. And so that's really what we're trying to fix. Jesper mentioned a little bit about the badging issue, and this is a major piece of my physical security program. That is understanding the badging gaps. And right now, I think other utilities, maybe even other companies out there that are built off of mergers and acquisitions over the last number of years. Every time you do a merger and acquisition, you bring on a new company, which typically has a new badging system, a new identity and access management system, a new camera system. And so bringing that all under the tent, all under the umbrella, and embracing convergence and have them work along with each other can be difficult, can be timely, and oftentimes cost a little bit of money too. And so that, I think, has been the obstacles. Kingdom building and legacy equipment merging together have been the obstacles.
Yeah, I agree, and they're both important, and one is more easy to overcome than the other, and I won't say it's the culture one because it's probably the more difficult one. So Jesper, let's give you the opportunity here to talk about how does a cyber physical security platform actually work. what applications and data is it connecting to, who are the users, and then how does a cyber physical security convergence platform help utilities take a stronger security posture?
Wow, that's
I know that's 3 questions in one.
that's a loaded question, but I'll never.
Okay, yeah, it's made for you. So let's start with how does a cyber physical security platform work?
Okay. So I think most of the people, before I actually explain how it works, I think most of the people sometimes oversimplify convergence. They feel like it's only a matter of building a connector between HR and physical security, or IT and physical security and all. And that's probably the least important part of it. Yes, you need connectors. I think the most important thing is to be able to do risk analysis across IT, physical, OT. I'll give you an example. Let's say if I'll take Brian Harrell as my example. So Brian is my manager. I join, I'm great today. Let's say I join as I have a role in the IT, or one of the employees doing, but mostly my requirement for access is IT. Tomorrow my job changes and I need access to physical systems or OT systems. Now, when I'm getting more access, I'm only requesting more access. I will never go to Brian and say, Brian, can you take my access away? That never happens. No, people are always requesting more access. But the more access I get, can I be the risk for the organization? Not because I'm a bad guy, but just I could be a nice person, but somebody could steal my identity. So can you have a solution that can do proactive risk analysis of my access? Let's say, I'll give an example. Let's say if I have access to, I'm an OT engineer, I have access to make relay setting changes. And I also have physical access to those areas where those relays are. I could be that person who could create a power outage. Is that a good idea? Maybe should there be 2 people? Should there be like 4I principle to make that kind of critical change? If I have access to manage inventory in the IT systems, if I also get access to physical access to the inventory, I can easily steal something and go into the IT system to adjust inventory, scrap inventory to hide my theft. And nobody will notice in the big scheme of things until it's too little to, until it's too late. So I think having a risk analysis engine, a 3-dimensional risk analysis engine that can normalize data between at IT, physical, OT system, to be able to do this meaningful risk analysis, where you can give that information, empower the manager, Brian, to say, oh, not a good idea. The moment I request that access, system will tell him, no, not a good idea. There has to be some mitigation control, or access should not be given. So rather than you just rely on people to have a gut feeling, yeah, he's a nice guy, I think it's okay to give him access. So that's why I think maybe a simple definition of convergence, but it's a platform level convergence. It's not only just building some connectors and say, oh, you can have just like superficial integration.
I think that's key, is that it is a platform approach. It's not an application approach. And integrating all of that, one by itself doesn't solve the problem, but all of them together solves the problem. So,
so
Brian,
sorry, one more thing.
Go ahead, Jasper.
Yeah, I forgot to mention. So here's the complex part. So now to solve the problem, you have HR system that could be Workday, SuccessFactors. There's so many different Oracle, SAP SuccessFactors and all. That contractor management system that could be like SAP Fieldglass, that could be Beeline. There's so many of those. There's so many different access control systems on the physical side, physical access control systems. There's so many different training systems, certification system, learning management system, where you want to check people's learning as the person trained or certified. Somebody's training might have expired. If they go into the sensitive facility, that's another violation. So how do you converge across all these IT, physical, OT systems from different vendors? How do you normalize that? That is a challenge, but I think the good news is that challenge is been addressed. It's already the customers who are addressing those.
Yeah, the technology exists today to address it for sure.
Yes.
Yeah. So Brian, and I'm might jump in on this one a little bit too. So, what is, although you have much more experience on this, real time experience, what's your perception of the cyber physical threat environment today? And more specifically, what does that mean for utilities?
Yeah, I had an old CEO tell me a while back that, you know, as utilities are investing billions with a B in their transmission and generation and distribution infrastructure, you know, every single infrastructure job that we have right now within my own organization, but I would extrapolate that out into the energy sector at large. Every single infrastructure project out there has some sort of an opposition group associated with it. Hands down, they absolutely do. And it really makes for some strange bedfellows as well. So we are a clean energy company. And so we have some environmentalist groups that don't necessarily like what we're doing or where we're building things. And then conversely, we also have some dirty energy companies that are investing money into kind of these public relation campaigns to try and tear us down. So again, very interesting bedfellows. But if you were to take a look at the environmental and domestic terrorism threat right now in the United States as it relates to energy infrastructure, this is a major concern for me. Right now, you can go to the dark web, you can go to some of the Facebook platforms and portals and chat rooms, and you can see some very specific, detailed instructions as to how to attack energy critical infrastructure, how to collapse lattice structures into transformers, how to use trucks and trains and all these other kinds of things to do this. And so, if you don't have your intelligence capability monitoring either open source or through some tools and through some government resources, if you don't have your intelligence function really monitoring what is being said in these chat rooms, you might one day be caught flat-footed in this particular issue. And I think where convergence really starts to play a role here is, whether you go back to the Metcalf attack in 2013, where they're cutting 911 lines and fiber optics and doing gunfire into the substation, you're seeing a lot of that same narrative apply today. You're having some domestic actors that are saying, look, I can overload their 911 system, or I can, through relationships with, hackers, I can, do a DDoS attack on their web portal or their website. And then you combine that with some sort of a physical attack at the same time, you can quickly overwhelm any security program. You just can't, because, unlike my time at DHS, unlike, your time at maybe the FBI or other federal organizations where you have these gigantic budgets and a ton of people, we're not built that way. And so really anything that happens can quickly overwhelm any organization. I will tell you this year, and maybe you want to talk about third party on this call, I don't know, but this year, right after Christmas, we had 5 third party attacks on our system. Now, fortunately, knock on wood, it didn't necessarily impact any of our systems, but the response was very similar, where you have to engage the vendor, you have to figure out what is happening, you have to figure out, did that vendor have any of our information, any of our client information, credit card information, schematics, maps, et cetera, does somebody else now have it? And so to try and be as detailed as you possibly can with response and recovery with the vendor, it's almost just as response intensive. And so to have a converged program where IT, OT, and physical are all talking to each other, I think really cuts down on the response time to get back to homeostasis.
Yeah, so I'm glad you brought third party up, because I'm going to get to a question about the Russia-Ukraine war in a minute, but the war started in the end of February of this year, and a company called Interos, they put out a report. They're a supply chain third party risk management company, they put out a report that highlighted, which was mind-boggling to me, that over 450 companies in the United States had tier 1 suppliers in Ukraine. But even more interestingly, over 2,000 companies, to actually over 2,100 companies, had US-based companies had at least one direct supplier in Russia. So you can imagine what that did to their supply chain immediately. I mean, you know, as sanctions started ramping up, if you had business with Russia, you had to find alternatives. So that, I think, added a lot of risk into the overall environment as people start figuring out, you know, how do we find another supplier? I mean, and this doesn't even take into account the tier 2 and tier 3 and tier 4 suppliers that some of those tier 1 suppliers are dependent upon. So one of the things that we always have to think about is, how do we acknowledge that that some of our third parties could be our greatest risk? These are the people that we're paying to provide us with products and materials and services. And unless we are paying attention, we may be signing up for somebody that has worse security than we do, but yet they have a direct line into our organization. So this goes back to what Jasper was saying about this platform approach, where you're able to integrate, you know, this entire environment of security tools to provide you as a CISO or a CSO at a utility, at your morning stand up, to provide you with you know kind of a one single pane of glass picture of everything that's going on. So I think the threat environment is pretty drastic. I mean, you know, you talked about this integration of the dark web with physical security attacks. You've got to be paying attention to the cyber component of it in order to acknowledge that physical things could happen.
Yeah.
So
I completely agree. I think right now we are living in a very dangerous time where, again, domestic individuals, you know, when DHS first stood up back in 2003, you remember this well, it was all about keeping bad actors out of the United States. Well, now a lot of the bad actors are already here. And with 85% of the critical infrastructure, you've heard that figure before, owned and operated by, you know, the private sector and whatnot. You know, if you own critical infrastructure, congratulations, you're on the front lines, right? You are in the battle space.
yeah.
And I often tell people, and having worn now both hats, public and private, the cavalry is not coming. You need to have the ability, through your resources, through your headcount, through your budget, through your relationships with your vendors, you need to be able to come back to normal, respond, recover, in my case, ensure electric power is reliable for our critical customers and our American citizens. You need to be able to do that within you know, minutes to hours. And if you're just laying in wait and just hoping that the government is going to come rescue you in your time of need, it's never coming. It's never coming.
The cavalry ain't there. Exactly. So Jezreel, give you a shot at this one first. As we look toward the future, is there a security related issue that utilities may not be paying enough attention to or preparing for today?
I would say the complex attacks, which are like blended threats, that could be cyber physical attacks, that could be also insider threat. Those are the two, I think the one that I personally feel are very important. And this is based on, I think, the working with number of utilities over a dozen utilities where customers felt that they were in good shape, but when they did the assessment, they realized, you know, oh my God, there's so much risk we are living with. So those are the two things that I really worry. I personally feel those are the biggest threats. I think, and Brian also touched on those. And like he mentioned, that the adversaries are not only outside, adversaries are here, and they could be, you know, part of our. They can become part of our teams. How do we make sure that we secure our infrastructure from anybody. Potentially anybody could be a threat. So cyber physical attacks, insider threat are the two things that I
So,
feel.
so Brian, this is a weird question to ask you, but not to have you revealed, anything untoward, but what do you think utilities, maybe other utilities, maybe not you, but other utilities, what aren't you paying enough attention to?
Well, the other guys, not us, of course, but
Exactly.
I would actually piggyback off of Jaz's comments. I 100% agree on insider threats. And not to diminish what I said earlier about third-party attacks, because that is very real and we're seeing it. But I am very convinced that the next major attack that happens on critical infrastructure doesn't necessarily happen from outside the perimeter fence or even outside of the firewall. It happens from within. So do we have and do we understand and do we have a level of visibility as to what data is leaving our proprietary IT system and going to somebody's Gmail, your competitor, or a nation state adversary overseas? I'm guessing the answer is maybe or no, right? And so I think shoring that up, doing data classification, understanding what data loss prevention actually looks like, because it's happening right underneath your nose. So that's the logical piece. But if we combine the logical piece with the physical of, somebody is monitoring or they're on, some violent websites, or they're looking at things that are questionable that, nobody would necessarily appreciate them looking during working hours. But you combine that with maybe threats that somebody has made. In the last engagement that, Billy Bob has had with his supervisor, and it talked about guns, or it talked about violence, or I'm going to bring my AR-15 to work. If you can somehow marry up the logical and the physical worlds to do a better job of monitoring, that is going to, I think, prevent surprises. And so again, insider threat is absolutely critical. A couple of years ago, we had no insider threat program whatsoever. And today, as we speak, not to be too revealing, but we have over 60 active insider threat investigations that deal with data loss. They deal with violent employees, high-risk terminations, all of these things that I think convergence or embracing convergence has actually helped us streamline our response.
Yeah, brilliant. I want to stay on this threat kind of conversation for a second. So we're 7 months into the Ukraine war. Should we be concerned about Russia? Are we prepared? That's for you, Brian.
The answer is yes. Has Russia, as a country and from a capability perspective, have they lived up to the hype? I'm going to suggest no. But please don't take that to say, oh, okay, wow, we dodged a bullet, we're in the clear, because they have a lot of capability. I don't know that they've necessarily even tapped into their cyber capability just yet, right? I think that is a calling card, that is a golden ticket that they may cash in on one day. But we're still seeing kill nets. We're still seeing them go after airports with DDoS attacks and everything, and KillNet is very linked to the government of Russia. And so it absolutely exists. I think Russia right now is very preoccupied with what is happening on the battlefield. To give a whole lot of focus on the cyber, it sounds like they might be a little out of resources. However, I think one of the big game changers that I saw within the last 10 days is using drones, Iranian-made drones operating, from Russian hands into Ukraine to kill Ukraine troops. That is huge. And if you're a law enforcement agency here in the United States, you better be monitoring and taking a look at what that looks like. Because now if you extrapolate that and you bring it here, and now you see a protest and you have counter protesters, and these counter protesters are going to deploy some sort of weapon or a way to get back at them, kind of thing. You can kind of see, you can see how this skill set, this capability can cause some significant issues very, very quick. You know, I often tell a story. Just a couple of years ago, my sons, they were 10 and 8, and I said, hey, we're going to go to Toys R Us and we're going to build a drone. And what I want you to do, here's the homework assignment. I want you to take this 6-inch piece of PVC pipe, and we're going to go up to 25 feet, and all I want you to do is drop it. That's it. That is the homework assignment. A couple of weeks goes by because we got school and baseball and things like that. And sure enough, they come back into the house. Dad, come take a look. And with a Bluetooth, very crude claw contraption, they dropped this 6-inch piece of PVC pipe from about 35 feet for about $104. And I'm thinking, my goodness, if that PVC was built with rocks, nails, screws, glass, and C4, we would have a significant issue. But today, we need to deploy, I think, technology at some of our large substations, at some of our large generation facilities that come back to a security operations center to monitor these kinds of threats.
So staying with it, Brian, I'm not going to let you off the hook here because I know you have an opinion on this. What about China? Are we giving China enough attention right now?
When we say we, I'm going to say I think there's some aspects of the policy world that is. I think there's some that are very focused, rightly so, on China. I think there are others right now who may be serving in the government as we speak that aren't necessarily as focused on China as I would like them to be. The way to overly simplify this, the way I kind of view it is, I think Russia wants to embarrass the United States government. China wants to steal your data. North Korea and Iran, they want to attack, but their capability is somewhat limited now, currently. And so right now, China is stealing data left and right. If they can do it for free, if they can do it easily, if they can somehow leap 10 years ahead of you by stealing all of your data, they're absolutely going to do that. And so, where I think the China issue comes into play is what you are attaching to your system, being mindful where this technology is coming from. And I'll kind of link my previous story about drones. Drones are a great tool, but they also have inherent risk if you're using the wrong technology in your system. If you're using Chinese manufactured drones as a tool for response and recovery, as a tool,
which most people are, by the way.
Most people are. I will not name names, but it is a significant issue. And it's not the boogeyman. We have seen this. I have seen this with my own eyes at DHS, seeing data leave a proprietary system and go directly overseas. Nobody's making this up. This is actually happening. And so we need to be very mindful. If we're going to attach things, where is our data going?
So I'm going to, Jasper, I'm going to flip and turn into a little bit more of the softer side because, Brian and I could talk about the boogeymen and the overseas all day long. By the way, my analogy, Brian, is that Russia is like a mobster, a brutal mobster. China is like a stealthy ninja. They're both doing the same thing, but completely different ways of doing it. So, Jasper, so as we look into the future, a lot of organizations are suffering from because they haven't embraced ESG or environmental, social, and governance kind of solutions and policies. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. That's, I think, probably the latest trend across all different sectors, especially banking. They really focus on environment, social governance. I think every sector is, but it makes a lot of sense especially for the utility sector or regulated industries where customers are actually really focused on being environment friendly. I'll give you one example of a customer where these are substations in the middle of nowhere, thousands of substations. People drive sometimes for a few hours to go to a substation, and sometimes they forget their badge at home. So nobody goes home when they forget their badge, but so they found out that sometimes people drove all the way and then came back, and their day was wasted. But also imagine how much gas you burn going there and coming back. So one of the customers came up with an idea. They said, if we can board a flight with our smartphone, why can't we enter a building? Why can't we enter a substation? Can we use mobile credentials? Can we use our smartphones to enter those substations, especially in the case if somebody forgot the badge? It could be a temporary access. And we did that for the customer, and they were so happy. One, it improved the workforce experience, the productivity. Now somebody goes to a substation, doesn't mean that they have to come back. They could use their smartphone to enter, and it could be a temporary access for that particular visit. But it also became, originally it was more about the workforce productivity experience, but now they are using it for environment social governance, that we are improving the environment, we are not wasting energy. Then when they did the study, they realized the plastic badges that we use, they're very environment friendly, that particular plastic. So now they're actually switching to mobile credentials. So they feel the right thing to do. So that is just one example of how utilities are embracing the whole being environment friendly. I'm sure there are a number of other examples, but that's the latest trend. And this is what customers are really leveraging as one of the things to.
Yeah, you remind me of a friend of mine, and this told me this story probably 10 years ago. He said, if I drive into he worked in downtown San Francisco. He says, it's about an hour drive for me. He said, if I forgot my badge, I got to work and I forgot my badge, I'd just get a temporary badge.
Yep.
Said, if I got to work and I forgot my cell phone, I'd drive home and get my cell phone. That's that much more important to me.
So we were in New York last week, and this SNG, securing new grounds, done by SIA, the same event, where customers were these are big banks who are actually demonstrating how they enter their buildings with their smartphones, Apple Watches, because they feel, and that also helps them to be environment friendly. So I think this is the latest trend. I'm sure utilities will also embrace it very soon.
Yeah, so much more efficient. Question for both of you. Let's start with you, Brian. How can we educate and empower the next generation of security leaders? All of us are, well, at least Jasper and I, we're getting toward the ends of our career. But sometimes it's a little concerning that the next generation is not, because the requirements for security leaders has grown so much. How can we empower and educate this next generation?
Yeah, I'm actually older than I look. I actually color all of my gray, so you can't barely tell.
Yeah, I saw your beard a couple of weeks ago.
You would be right. You would be right. I think especially in the utility space, and we're a little bit guilty of this too, and that is, Brian, we're going to increase your headcount in your organization by 3 next year. And you're thinking, oh my gosh, these are 3 golden tickets. I need to make sure they are the best possible, most seasoned individual rock stars I could possibly bring in. And by doing that, you're bringing in somebody, 15, 20, 25 years of experience, and then they retire 3 years later, where the better return on investment might have been to bring in some younger individuals that you can train, you can educate, you can kind of open their eyes, and you can create a cyber or a national security career path from point A all the way to point Z within your organization. And so I think right now that has been difficult, because inherently we all want to bring in, the rock stars, but we're forcing ourselves to let's bring in some newer talent, and let's have them cut their teeth on our critical infrastructure, IT systems, OT, physical security systems, et cetera. And that's been important to us. We also tend to lean on a lot of the veterans organizations that are out there. Especially love vets that have done, 3, 4, 6 years, and now they're looking to go do something else. They still want to serve. They don't necessarily know how to serve, but I can convince you that, protecting critical infrastructure for the United States is a very noble and noteworthy endeavor. So we try to focus on young veterans as well.
Thank you, Brian.
Jasper?
I totally agree. Sorry. So I totally agree. I feel, so one of the things, remember we were talking about environment, social governance, that companies want to be environment friendly. That's a brand thing. I think same thing should be about education, that it should be like a responsibility for us to educate the next generation, because not doing is like a crime. So I think we should feel guilty if we don't do that. And to that point, I'll share with you one example from one of the utility customers. The CIO came to Silicon Valley to visit us. He said, Jaspreet, why don't you have a lab over here? You should have a mock substation. You should have a mock, a control room and everything, so that you can educate people. And I love that idea. We haven't done that, but I think Brian, Mark, with your help, it could be in Silicon Valley, it could be somewhere else, but there should be a way to educate our next generation on the latest and greatest things, like the threats that you talked about, where we can show them there could be real life experience. I think we should, there's something, and by the way, SIA is big on that. So SIA has an initiative called RISE. RISE is about education. So we should collaborate with them to really educate, our younger generation.
Yep.
Yeah, I think that model exists, or a similar model is at Idaho National Labs, right, Mark, where you have the red and blue,
Yep.
right? They have the complete mock-up. We're going to attack a
Oh my gosh.
security OT system, and you kind of see it all with your own eyes. Don't tell me, but show me. And that goes a long, long way.
Yep.
Yeah. So we have a question. Actually, we have two questions from the audience, and we have 7 minutes left. So I'm going to jump over to these. So here's the question from Stefan or Stefan. You both mentioned contractors and the insider threat, personnel with legitimate access to critical infrastructures who are knowledgeable and skilled to do their jobs, but also to cause harm. The insider is well placed to do the enabling part, preparing the actual attack. Is there any statistical data or case studies on cyber-enabled physical attacks and vice versa, physical-enabled cyber attacks that you're aware of?
Not offhand, but I do want to, I think, maybe put a finer point on his point, and that is, I am very convinced that companies do a lot of really good background checks and things like that on their proprietary employees. They don't do as good of a job with their contractors. And again,
yes,
you have contractors that are cutting down trees in very wooded areas, and maybe what can be only described as a hotly contested environmental scenario. You don't know necessarily who you're bringing in to do some of that work. And so having background checks done on contractors that are touching your equipment, that are operating in your area of responsibility, that might be driving around in your marked vehicles or representing you when they engage the community. That's absolutely critical. And I think a lot of times we don't do a good job of also investigating the contractors. So some of these contractors, if you're thinking big, can say, let me get an easy job over here. Let me get deep into the woods. Let me go to start touching and tinkering and monkey wrenching with their infrastructure, and I can do some significant damage. And it will be all done with the veil of legitimacy.
Yep. So Jasper, I'm thinking of, you had an airport that had some employees that were doing some bad things, and then the mining company that they found that their employees. So maybe mention those.
Sure, absolutely. So this is a very giving specific examples is difficult, but I can share, like you mentioned, generically. This has been a big issue for all sectors, especially aviation that Mark mentioned. There were incidents where somebody was able to smuggle explosives on a very high-profile airline from a very high-profile airport. It was an insider job, contractors engaged. And the way to find those, so there are incidents that happen, there are people who are compromised. The best way to find them, there are a number of ways to find them. One of them is behavior analytics. When people do something malicious, their behavior typically is abnormal. So identifying, looking at the behavior, somebody going to certain area where they really don't belong, especially after their work hours, why would they be there? Why would somebody go to a substation? Like I was mentioning, nobody goes to substation for fun. Nobody does baggage handling for fun for airports. So there are a number of ways to find those. One of those is behavior analytics, but we can definitely discuss details offline.
Thank you. So one more question from Ellie. I'll give you the first shot at this one, Brian. Today, we see more movement towards using the cloud or hybrid solutions. Is there more risk with data stored in the cloud than on-prem? And that's first. And are there any restrictions for data protection for critical infrastructure that would make the cloud prohibitive?
Yeah, you know, I think in the case where we have struggled to embrace the cloud in the past, I think we've done a good job here recently, but in the past, where we've struggled to gravitate towards the cloud is because of regulation, NERC, and everyone was afraid to lean too far forward. Are we getting beyond kind of the scope of NERC, beyond the letter of the law? Nobody wanted to get sideways with their regulator, and so I think moving to the cloud is actually a good thing, albeit I think you are just simply transferring risk, but by and large, it is a good thing to do. But we were so slow to embrace that. So not necessarily the question here, but as we think through regulation, and there's a ton of it coming out of Washington, D.C. right now, or at least the knee-jerk reaction to regulate everything. Let's make sure that it is performance-based. We're not simply checking black and white boxes, and we're embracing new technologies coming online.
Yeah. So we have 2 minutes. Let me give you guys 1 minute each to wrap up. If you could give utilities, CISO, CSO, or their teams, one piece of advice, what would it be? You first, Jasper.
I would say bridge the silos. Why wait? There's something we know is, living with high risk. Why would you not do that? And be bold. Like I was sharing, like Wayne Gretzky thing, this quote, you miss all the shots that you don't take. So take a shot, bridge the silos.
Brilliant. Brian?
Yeah, I think that's obviously a good one. If you don't have an insider threat program, it starts with governance. Then you go into network monitoring to understand what's happening on your system. Make the investment now, because there are nefarious employees right now as we speak doing things that you probably would not appreciate, or they are introducing risk into your system. And then lastly, and just kind of a little off topic, if you're not paying attention to what's happening in Washington, D.C. right now, you have to. And it's twofold. Number one, there's a lot happening, but number two, especially in the cybersecurity space, vendors at large have never had greater access to federal agencies, to the White House, to the National Security Council, to really shape what cybersecurity is and what it should look like.
Yep. Yeah, just to wrap up on that note, Brian, I did a talk last week, and I just did a little research, and there were at the time, I think there were 2,552 individual pieces of legislation related to cybersecurity in the federal. That doesn't even count what's happening at the state level. So pay attention to what's happening in DC, because it affects all of us. Mm-hmm. So that's all we have time for today. Thank you guys very much for joining, and we will get this the recording of this out in a couple days. Thank you all very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Perfect. Thanks, everyone. Thanks to you, Mark, Jasper, and Brian. Have a great afternoon, everyone.